All right, let's watch this real quick. Let's watch Joe Rogan's solution to homelessness. Can't wait to see it.
County, 60,000 homeless. In LA City, 44,000. All of California, 116,000 unsheltered, meaning outside in tents. 160,000 total, meaning unsheltered and in shelters.
How is it 100,000 in Los Angeles County and Los Angeles City, but in only another 16,000 in the rest of the state?
No, 60,000 in LA County.
Right, but you said 40,000 in LA proper.
Oh yeah, sorry, but that's the 60,000 includes the 44,000.
Oh, okay.
And San Francisco has somewhere between, I would say, officially it has 8,000 total homeless, but I think it's much more likely to be 10 to 12,000 total homeless, of whom
That's literally nothing. If California got their shit together, they could fix that problem. They could build public housing in literally 2 years to solve the entire homeless problem. That's actually pathetic. Like, this is fucking pathetic.
I would say around 6 to 8 are unsheltered. Now, during a year, at least 20 to 25,000 unsheltered homeless pass through the city. So you get a lot of
So do you consider that people without tents? Are they unsheltered?
No. The people in the tents are considered unsheltered homeless.
Oh, okay.
So these are the sheltered. The only people considered sheltered are people in official shelters.
I see.
Yeah.
So roughly speaking, you're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000 people in the state.
It could be that many. It's a daunting task when you consider it, particularly since
It's really not. You just build a lot of housing and you dedicate to building it. It's not hard. They have $100 billion surplus this year. Like, spend it on building housing. It's not hard.
Models that we have are of the 5 European cities that shut down their homeless encampments. One thing I discovered is that the Europeans called them open drug scenes. We euphemistically refer to them as homeless encampments, which makes them sound like they're making marshmallow s'mores.
Yeah, and then also it brings us back to that they're down on their luck narrative.
Right, that they're Okies is the picture. They're just Okies. They just can't afford the rent. No, they're not there.
Okies?
Well, remember Grapes of Wrath, the John Steinbeck novel.
Hey, remember when there was fucking homeless people in the past? How did we fix that? How do we fix the homelessness in the 30s? The 20s? I wonder what we did. I guess we just killed them all, right? With guns? We shot them? Oh, wait, no. We had the New Deal and we built housing. Oh, that's what happened. We had the new fucking deal. Oh, damn. I should have fucking known.
Novel is they came from the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. They came to California. And then they lived in tents. And so this archetypal...
So it literally happened in the past. How'd they fix it that time?
When, people that would never go and talk to homeless people or much less interview them, they look at those tents and they go, they're poor people. That's like how the mentality works.
What, they're rich? They're rich, you stupid fuckhead? Yeah, I like living in a tent without a fucking toilet or shower or any privacy or any security at all. That's what I like to do. I'm just weird like that. I legitimately chat. Like, look. I'm not saying. Chat, have you ever heard of a phrase on site as like a meme? You know what I mean? Like on site. Excuse me, I type out on site. On site. What does on site mean? You know how it's used in hip-hop culture to reference a threat? You see what I mean? Have you ever heard about that on site in hip-hop? Isn't that kind of like interesting how that's part of culture? Isn't that? Anyway, totally anyway, back on to this.
As opposed to like, no, they became addicted to hard drugs. They stopped working. They overstayed their welcome with friends and family. They usually often stole money or lied or cheated from the folks they were staying with, and then they were finally kicked out onto the street, and then they go just live in the open drug markets, and the open drug markets become the open drug scenes. One of the characters in San Francisco,
the homeless population,
he was like, when we were walking through the Tenderloin, which is like the Skid Row of San Francisco, he goes, yeah, that's the doorwell I used to sleep in because I didn't want to walk 5 blocks away to the shelter. I wanted to be right where the drug dealers were. So part of it is that you see the other thing is that like the people often in the open drug scene might not be homeless in the sense that they might actually have places to stay, but what you'll see when you watch the open drug scenes is that people will come on their bikes or they'll walk there, they'll buy the drugs from the dealers, and they'll use them right there. They're in such a hurry to get their fix. They'll buy the fentanyl and meth, and they'll just sit right there, and then over a period of time...
You don't sit there when you use a meth! Legitimately, this guy is fucking brain dead. Yeah, guys, famously chill meth using. Most people who use meth use it for productivity. If you want to actually know, most people who use meth have hard physical labor jobs that requires them to maintain wakefulness and alertness for long stretches of time. That's when people use meth. Or they're like hard partying. Okay? That's it. It's not, oh, I go down to my dealer and then use the meth as quick as I can. Get the fuck out of here.
They're just there all the time with their little foil and lighting the meth and fentanyl and smoking it, and they just become catatonic.
So we have these numbers. Let's just
60%
whatever the
of
number
homeless
is in
people have
LA.
full-time jobs.
100,000.
Yes,
Let's
we
say
know.
100,000. Let's start with LA. What is available in terms of shelter, and do you make new buildings? Do you buy buildings?
Yes.
Heroin makes
Yep.
you.
And it's not clear that I'm not sure yet. We have a working group on this, and so we're looking at this. It's not clear where you start. One argument is that you start where you have the strongest local political support. So there is a mayoral election in LA. We'll see what happens. But for example, let's say the Sacramento.
See, the problem that we have here, chat, is that we're in a moment where the status quo is fundamentally unacceptable, and Democrats and centrists are enamored with the status quo, and they can only think of minor tinkering. Fascists are proposing radical solution, eliminationist rhetoric, extermination, violence, killing, incarceration. No one has the radical idea of solving homelessness and housing affordability by building houses. I mean, it's absolutely fucking nuts that I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. It's well documented how it starts. The majority of the unhoused lose their housing because they can no longer afford it. Then while on the streets to deal with the trauma of not having your basic needs met, some turn to drugs. This guy is just lying. Also, even if addiction was causing people to go out on the streets, the solution isn't, by the way, it's just obviously it's an affordability problem. People with full-time jobs can't afford houses. It's obviously affordability, dummy. But even if it wasn't, which it clearly is, you dumb fuck, the solution is not to, I don't know, exterminate people. We don't have houses for poor people. My God, how dumb are you? Building your way out is wrong. Yeah. Okay.
Mayor is like, Michael, we love your whole agenda. Let's start in Sacramento. So because what I feel very strongly about is that success breeds success. So we want to start somewhere where we get some good outcomes, where we see a big difference in a pretty short period of time, by which I mean months, not years.
Sacramento is a place that has much cheaper rent because the city sucks ass. So a solution is going to be easier. Also, you could just, send people to another city if you're a fucking malignant narcissist. Sociopath. Wapmop, thank you for the tier 1.
That we are using our emergency powers the least amount necessary because we want to protect human rights and individual rights, which are now being violated. We want to protect those rights. We want to limit the powers that the governor has because the governor has absolutely extraordinary powers in disaster situations, which is what this is. You get success. Now, you get people into shelter, you get people into rehabs, you get some people into psych hospitals. You might actually get people to go back home to Kentucky or Colorado or wherever they came from. But I think it's also fair to assume that some amount of those so-called unsheltered homeless addicts and mentally ill people will go somewhere else in the state where they're not being required to stay in the shelters. Because, of course, you've got to enforce the no camping. You got to enforce the camping ban. Otherwise, you destroy your city.
In other words, he just knows that if you go in one city, you do a crackdown, you just encourage people to leave, and then you declare victory. You're just pushing your problem onto another area. I legitimately think he's ontologically evil, chat.
Cities which are being destroyed now, and people are not getting the help they need. So one vision is that you would start where you have the strongest local support. Another vision is that you start in a smaller town. Another vision is that you start where it's hardest, which is LA.
I would say start in LA just because it's too far gone and it needs to be cleaned up as quickly as possible. And some headway needs to be done because it's just going to keep growing. Have you paid attention to what happened in Austin?
Yes.
Austin's been pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Because the mayor who I had on the podcast, he really clearly stated that this is his goal. He said, I want to clean this up before I leave office. And if I don't do that, I'll consider my tenure a failure.
Good.
And he...
So if you make it clean up, then you're going to be a failure. You're going to be a failure. If clean up is your strategy, you're going to fail.
Did a lot.
He's reversed himself because there was a ballot initiative passed that banned camping.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one that allowed public camping, right?
Yes.
And then there was a ballot initiative that passed that banned it. Now, my understanding is that a lot of unsheltered homeless have moved into the woods, have moved into other parts of Austin.
Oh,
I
so
haven't
he did solve
tracked it
it
closely. But
He
I mean,
didn't
at the end of
solve
the
it
day,
at all.
A lot to put people into shelters.
That's great.
They
But
haven't done anything. Even this guy's refuting Joe. Ridiculous.
thing is, if you don't kidnap them, it's very difficult. I mean, I'm not saying you should kidnap people, but I'm saying if you don't physically force them into doing something, these people, I mean, by nature, that like the type of person that's willing to live on a tent on Cesar Chavez, like that's a radical mindset. Sorry to use the word radical again, but
they've disintegrated.
Yeah, I mean, you've gone that
They've
far.
lost their
They're not radical. Society is radical. The status quo is radical. By the way, this is dehumanizing rhetoric, and they're talking about how you have to use what amounts to violations of human rights. Don't give them. They don't have autonomy. You have to violate their human rights. That's what he's saying. This is fascist. The alternative, chat, is to tax rich people slightly more and build public housing.
Yeah, exactly.
Setting up a lawn chair on a major street
right
in front of this tent that you live in, and
right.
you're drinking water out of an old milk jug that you bought or got somewhere. It's crazy.
It's not okay.
The whole thing is crazy, and they've done a great job in Austin of cleaning it up. But one of the things that the mayor said when I talked to him about it, he said, we can clean up 3,000 people. We can do that. He goes, but if it gets to where Los Angeles is, that's untenable. It's unmanageable. That's what his thought was.
Yeah.
He felt like it was so far gone that no one had the resources to gather up all those people.
The richest country in the world who's spending $850 billion. $850 billion, chat. How many homeless did they say there was in LA? Does anyone remember what was the number was? I didn't remember. I don't remember what they said. Anyone remember what it was? You could build everybody $1 million home with half of California's surplus. $1 million home to every homeless person in LA with half of California's surplus. Now, imagine if you took land and you built high quality public housing. It wouldn't cost you $1 million per. Land value is what gets most development in LA County. You just take the land. Did I miss the massive leftist victories? You did not.
And get them off the streets. And like,
let's not do
that.
Okay, like Skid Row.
Yeah.
That would be where you would start. You want to start at Skid Row.
I don't know that we'll start there.
That's what I'm saying. See what I'm saying? Like, that's such a giant
we'll get
problem.
there. Well, yeah, I mean, the other issue is that, and let me just address this other issue which you raised, which I think is an important issue, which is like, let's say we do a really good job and we get addicts and mentally ill people more of them coming to California, and then we're shouldering the burden for the entire country. There's two answers to that. First is that we're going to need to ask the states that sent us their people to share that burden, or we're going to need to go to Congress and be like, look, if we're going to treat the nation's addicts in rehab facilities, then we're going to need to be reimbursed. We have mechanisms to do that.
There's also a real danger if this becomes a place where people can go to clean up and people can go to be taken care of, that more people come, and then crime increases, and then more people leave the state.
Right.
Which, I mean, the numbers of people that have left California over the last couple years.
So Joe Rogan believes that if you try to solve homelessness and drug addiction through treating people, that will attract more people with problems to come to your area. And see, what happens when you get in the mindset like somebody like Joe Rogan, and you think these people are scum, you start to think like this.
Are staggering.
That's right. We need all the other issue. Yes, that's definitely a concern. So you also need more police officers. So I point out you don't have to choose between mass homelessness and mass incarceration, but that means that you need the 3 key Ps: more police, more psychiatry, and more probation.
What does probation do? I thought public housing was going to be in there, but of course you don't need more incarceration. You need more incarceration and violence, though.
So that is for sure part of this agenda. I think the other part of it that's not appreciated is that you need more development. When you visit Skid Row, so I'm not a I've been in Northern California since 1993.
Well.
When I went to Skid Row, I was like, this neighborhood is awesome. I mean, if you ignore the complete human depravity and tragedy on the grounds.
Real estate?
Yeah, you look around the buildings and like it's sunny and it's near the highways and you're like, this is an incredible neighborhood. It needs to be redeveloped. You need to have a much broader mix of people in there.
They tried to do that for a while, right? I mean,
it's to some extent it's happening, but it needs to happen much more significantly, which means that we need to expedite and cut the red tape and get those buildings redeveloped and get people in there. And then it means that a lot of those services, you don't have, like, there's no constitutional right to just go to be in Skid Row or in downtown LA or downtown San Francisco and just be given a free apartment. If you want rehab, or if you are arrested and given the choice of rehab or prison, the rehab you might get might be in Fresno or Bakersfield, or it might be in Yuba County, or it might be in the Sierras, and that might be where you should. That might be the best place to be. 90-day.
I mean, are those communities going to take people that are drug addicts? They're all going to say no. You can't do it in this local-based way. It has to be a mandate. And it has to be part of a... And yes, people who live in LA should get treated in LA. It's the richest, one of the richest cities in the world. Give me a break.
Rehab facility, or 120 days where you're then on a fire crew. I mean, for heaven's sake, we need many more people working.
Wait, I thought they were human garbage, but they could fight fires? They could fight fires? I thought they were human garbage. Well, they have value as slaves, though. They have suddenly their labor is valuable as slaves.
On preparing forests and to prevent fires, for example, is one of the many things that we need to do in California.
Cleanups, cleaning up
absolutely. Prescribed burns. That's like manual, hard labor. Not everybody's going to do it. Some people might learn Python at rehab. Some people might learn woodworking.
Python?
That's just a basic programming language.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But
I
the
thought
idea
you were
is,
talking about like cleaning up pythons in Florida. You're going to ship them out to Florida?
Maybe that too. This can be, I mean, one of the revolutions that we have not taken advantage either in schooling or in mental health care or rehab is personalization. I mean, everybody's different. Like there's some people that should be people that would be great on a fire crew, working on Cal Fire. Other people, could be helping other people to get into recovery.
You can't get a job as a firefighter if you have a drug addiction problem.
So we can do all those things with a centralized system, with a really good centralized system. And the other key ingredient that we don't have is professional, assertive case managers, where somebody is tracking your progress.
We don't have the resources to put them anywhere. What, are you going to track them and then what? There's nowhere to go. There's no educational foundations. There is no psychiatry resources available. There is no housing available. What are you talking about? The case managers are going to aggressively what? Stand around?
If you're arrested or you overdose and you go into rehab, before you get out, there's a plan for you so that you don't just go right back on the street and start smoking fentanyl and overdose and die or just become an addict again. There's some plan for you. And we're going to keep a close eye on you and make sure that you commit to that plan. We know that people relapse, but we can reduce that amount of relapsing with a really engaged, good assertive case manager. And it may be that this is someone who does have a potential to be reunited with his family in Ohio. If that's the path, that's great, and I'll work with the governor of Ohio to get that done. I'll work with the Congress to make sure that there's Medicaid money for that person to get fixed and repair their life.
They left
right
Ohio
now,
because
there is nothing like
Ohio.
that, and that's what Cal-Psych would do. So in the emergency response, I give myself 2 years before we go back to voters. I'm going to put, as soon as we come into office, day one, go to the legislature and be like, here's my legislation for shelter first. That's the first thing. Shelter first.
Not housing, shelter, which are uncomfortable, and they don't those strategies, man.
Treatment first, housing earned. You don't have an
Housing
entitlement
earned.
to your own apartment in LA. You don't just get to go to LA and be like, hey, I'm a homeless drug addict, give me my own apartment. It doesn't work. It's not ethical. It's not fair. And
Okay,
it's
but if they
freeloading.
do go there, and
It's
then
not ethical. It's not fair. See, it has nothing to do whether or not it works or not. He just doesn't think it's fair that somebody gets a place. And that's it. He's ideologically committed to the idea it's not fair you get to live in LA. I get to live in LA because I'm good and I earned it. You don't live in LA. That's how these right-wingers think. And everything is premised on that.
they don't work,
well,
they're
then
just going to be homeless.
if you can't, so we're going to enforce a statewide camping ban.
So where do you start? Venice? Like, that's a good eyesore.
I mean,
right?
give me. I've got a little bit of time to figure out where we start, and
Right.
some of it will depend on politics.
Have you run numbers with anybody?
We're doing that right now.
Yeah. So it seems like it's going to
We're going to come in on my inauguration day with legislation that goes in front of the legislature, and I'm going to take emergency actions as governor to deal with the disaster. We can get FEMA shelters set up, triage tents. We can get the National Guard involved if we need to in a strictly civilian capacity.
How many people do you need in terms of like counselors, police officers, law enforcement, just to handle the homeless problem? It seems like you need a team.
Oh, it's a huge. That's a great question. That's in many ways.
Tom,
There's sort of the institutional arrangement. There's where do you start geographically. There's how do you do the legal side. I assume we'll just.
See, the problem is you can't start. We have to start everywhere at the same time. We've got 300+ million people in this country. We could solve issues like building a few thousand houses. Ridiculous.
Be sued by ACLU. That's fine. We'll go to court over what we're doing. That's fine. And then there's workforce. And in some ways, the workforce is the most important thing. We're losing. I mean, both LA and San Francisco are short like 500 police officers at this point.
Ridiculous idiot. Ridiculous fucking idiot. Here's how you actually solve housing. Here's how you actually solve it. It's only 8 minutes, so we could throw this in here.
American housing is in crisis. Right now, up to 12 million Americans are behind an average of $5,800 on rent and risk eviction. With eviction moratoriums soon to expire, we're facing an unprecedented wave of evictions and foreclosures that will crash straight into millions of struggling families across the country. But the truth is, this crisis didn't begin with the pandemic. In fact, housing has been in crisis for a very long time. Even before the pandemic, in places like New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco, median rents for even one-bedroom apartments could approach $2,500 a month or more. About a third of people in Los Angeles spend a majority of their income on housing. In New York City, about 20% of all renters pay most of their income to their landlord. And in my district, Astoria, about a quarter of residents have to spend most of their paycheck on rent.
Polly, thanks
And
for
the crisis isn't just in big cities. In 95% of all U.S. counties,
By the way,
workers
Chad, this is old data. It's now 100%. It's now 100%.
making the minimum don't make enough to afford a one-bedroom rental on their own. The Harvard Center for Housing Studies warns of a new normal for housing in the United States, in which nearly half of all renter households spend almost a third of their income on rent. That's why even before the fallout from the coronavirus started to hit, more than 500,000 Americans nationwide were already homeless, millions more on the brink of losing their housing, and countless families struggling every month to make ends meet. At the root of all of this suffering is the fact that in this country, housing is treated as a commodity, not a right. It's a consumer product, just like clothes or cars, that private businesses can sell on the market to make a profit. And if someone isn't able to pay, either because their landlord raised their rent or because they can't work for one reason or another, they're not able to stay in their homes. If they're lucky, they can live with friends or family, or maybe in transitional housing for a bit. But for a lot of people, they have nowhere else to go, and they end up sleeping on the streets. In December 2019, the number of people sleeping in homeless shelters in New York reached 19,000 people, an all-time high. 100,000 New York City students are homeless. That's more than 10% of the entire student population. Why do so many people end up homeless? It's not because there aren't enough homes to go around. There are plenty of empty homes. No, it's because housing people is not the primary goal of developers or landlords. Their goal, simply put, is to make a profit. And it's much more profitable to build luxury apartments for the rich than decent homes for the poor.
And they get tax credits to do it. They get tax credits to do it, which I just showed you. The newest building in Philadelphia. is a fucking ultra luxury $2 million is the cheapest apartment, fucking private gated parks, and that got millions and millions in tax abatements.
This gives us a big shortage of homes for ordinary working people. For every 100 households that are extremely low income, there are only 36 affordable and available homes. As a result, we have plenty of housing for the rich, but poor and working class people don't have nearly enough on the market. So we have people scrounging to make ends meet or sleeping on the streets right below luxury condos and uninhabited apartments. This is a terrible way to organize a housing market. It might be profitable for landlords and developers, but it's not efficient or beneficial for the rest of society. In fact, housing doesn't have to be seen as a market at all. In other countries, housing is considered a fundamental right, like education or healthcare. That means the government goes to significant lengths to guarantee everyone has a home, and the market plays a much smaller role in the construction and distribution of housing. So let's hop across the pond and about 100 years back in time to take a look at just one example of how an alternative housing model got started in beautiful red Vienna. At the end of the First World War, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, leaving behind a number of successor states, including modern-day Austria, home to the former imperial capital of Vienna, the fifth largest city in the world. Despite being the seat of an empire, the chaos of the war and decades of neglect had left the working class of Vienna in desperate circumstances. Inflation was rampant, jobs were scarce, social services were non-existent, and hundreds of thousands of people were crammed into decaying tenements where overcrowding, disease, and violence were rampant. So it's no surprise that in 1919, at the first elections ever held in Austria where all adult citizens could vote, the Social Democratic Party swept into power at the municipal level on the promise of dramatic social and economic reform. And they delivered. The new government of Vienna implemented a huge range of services, including public health care and public child care. They built high-quality hospitals, schools, and recreational facilities. But their crowning achievement was an ambitious program of social housing, what Americans call public housing, that began in 1923 and saw 60,000 new apartments constructed in the first year of its existence, built by the government and financed by taxes on the rich. But these weren't the kinds of apartments you might picture when you think of public housing in the United States. Drab high-rises plagued by chronic neglect and underinvestment. Residents could enjoy leafy courtyards, wide-open spaces, and plenty of natural light. They had shared laundries, state-of-the-art kitchens, food co-ops, bathhouses, pharmacies, lecture halls, schools, and swimming pools. These apartments were designed to be both beautiful to look at and beautiful to live in, fostering a sense of shared community among the people who lived there. And the best part was that because the city didn't have to worry about making a profit, just about paying off their maintenance costs, these homes were both much nicer and much cheaper than what workers had previously known. In 1926, the average rent in Viennese social housing was about just 4% of a monthly wage. The first 15 years after Austrian independence saw its capital transform from a symbol of urban blight into a beacon of socialist governance. It became known as Red Vienna, after the official color of the socialists who had pioneered these changes. And even though Red Vienna fell in 1934 when the country was seized by fascists, who did what they could to roll back social housing, that commitment to good, cheap housing remained after the Second World War. Today, an astonishing 62% of all city residents live in social housing, with the average monthly rent falling somewhere between $400 and $600 a month, with subsidies for lower-income tenants. That is a fraction of what people in America pay. Unlike in the United States, where public housing is treated as a worst-case way to house the very poor, Vienna's social housing residents are extremely diverse. Everyone except the top fifth of the population is eligible to live in social housing. This means there's broad appeal across many segments of society, which creates the foundation for its political popularity. That is how the majority of people in Vienna enjoy something that's considered almost utopian here in New York. Affordable housing that isn't just cheap, but desirable. Housing that isn't just four walls and a roof, but a real home, with a sense of stability, safety, and community built in. Now, of course, this is only one example of an alternative framework for housing, and Vienna has not fully removed housing from the domain of the market. Residents still pay part of their earnings in rent to cover operational costs, and a sizable chunk of the population lives in private housing. But it's an actually existing alternative that shows us what a step toward a better world could look like. If we want to end the housing crisis, the solution has to be moving toward the full decommodification of housing. In other words, moving away from the status quo in which most people access housing by purchasing it on the market, and toward a future where we guarantee high-quality housing to all as a human right. So how can we do it? We can start by making sure people who access housing on the private market have ironclad protections against abuse and exploitation. But to go further, toward the Vienna model, we'll have to go beyond the market. We can establish community land trusts to gradually buy up housing on the private market and convert it to
Get rid of those fucking parking lots.
community ownership. We can give tenants a right of first refusal to buy out their landlords when buildings go up for sale. And we can fully commit to a new era of social housing, ending subsidies for luxury housing development and using our wealth to build beautiful, high-quality social housing projects that offer good homes and strong communities to everyone. We won't decommodify housing overnight, but we know what we have to do, and we have history to guide us. And we know how we'll get there, through a movement of the multiracial working class organizing for the better world we know is possible. And we've already begun. I'm Zohran Mamdani, Assemblyman for New York's 36th Assembly District in Astoria, Queens, for the Gravel Institute.
So anyway, I went there, chat. I went there because I was in Vienna and I went there. And so this is public housing. Public fucking housing. So we're talking about the poorest of the poor area in Vienna. And what did it look like? They had buses like crazy. There was a tram station. I was there to go to a subway station. Tree lined. All sorts of public transit right out the front door. No violence. No homeless people. Literally the largest public housing. Totally safe. Completely safe. Here, I took a quick shot because I was trying to run to get to a train I was taking. You could literally see the balconies. And people have flowers on them. It's called Karl-Marx-Hof. Actually based. There was trams, trains, buses. People here are used to the communal spaces of the social housing estates and are very comfortable living next to someone from a different background. Because people are not crushed by their rents like in other major cities, they have a bit more time to be creative, to study, to get involved in community work. Vienna's positive impact on its citizens hasn't gone unnoticed. Earlier this year, the city was judged to offer the best quality of life of any city in the world for the 9th year in a row. Eva Bauer, head of the housing economics at the Austrian Federation of Limited Profit Housing Associations, says keeping housing affordable is deemed to be a vital factor contributing to citizens' well-being. In fact, the extent of Vienna's subsidized housing makes it one of the most affordable major cities in the world. So in other words, best quality of life, but also cheap? Oh my God, pie in the sky! In fact, the extent of Vienna's subsidized housing makes it one of the most affordable major cities in the world. According to the GBV, the average monthly rent paid by those living in government-subsidized housing is $470 for city council tenants and $600 for housing association tenants, with monthly assisted payments available to those struggling to meet housing costs. On average, tenants in Vienna spend 27% of their income on rent. So in other words, Vienna is one of the only places in the world where you could actually live in a nice city and pay the amount of money you're supposed to pay. In contrast, a Street Easy study found the median asking rent in New York City was expected to reach $2,700 in 2015. It's fucking God knows what it is now. Social housing is a valued priority across Austria, funded by income tax, corporate tax, and a housing-specific contribution made by all employed citizens. According to Councillor Gall, Vienna's annual housing budget, which is spent refurbishing older apartments in the city as well as building new social housing projects, amounts to $700 million, with $530 million coming from the national government. That's it? That's all? The NYPD spends $10.9 billion a year. And by the way, Vienna only spends $170 million of their own city tax dollars because they get $530 million from the government. Incredible! Bauer says 1/3 of the 13,000 new apartments built in Vienna each year are funded by the government and commissioned by housing associations. Social housing is very popular, she says. There are a lot of young people who want to become housing association tenants, even if they have to wait on a list for a couple of years before they can get something. City is growing, so the challenge now is building enough affordable housing and maintaining the quality that has made it so popular. The developers' competition process in the 90s means architects, lawyers, and other housing experts sit on panels judging bids to build new social housing complexes, ensuring developers vie with each other to build high-quality, energy-efficient homes. Mike, this is impossible. This is impossible. This is fake. This is fake. This is impossible. This is fake. We have to have hundreds of thousands of people living in tents. Oh, God, no. Imagine if you took profits away from landlords. What would we all do? Meanwhile, in New York, these are the lines to view vacant apartments in New York City.
Right now. Yeah. Also, like,
I'm gonna do groups of 8 to 10, and everybody else can wait across the street. Apparently, the business is here. I had no idea.
Utterly pathetic. Utterly fucking pathetic. Worthless country. Worthless country. Fuck this dumbass country. We have an old idea here that not only rich people should live in good conditions, says Manch, who cannot imagine ever living anywhere but Vienna. It's an important idea, and we should hold on to it. I want to know how much Alterlaa costs to build. The Wohnpark Alterlaa. It's in Deutsch. Jesus fucking Christ. Right? Here it is. Where the fuck is the translate button? Is there a way to English? No? Why would we want to have a Wikipedia entry in English on this? We fucking did it. Finally. Jesus Christ. The residential and shopping park Alterlaa is one of the largest residential complexes of Vienna and forms a city within the city of Vienna with complete infrastructure. This facility is considered a showcase project of the functioning satellite city of the 70s, often as a counterexample to the nearby Schaffwerk settlement. 3,200 mostly family-friendly apartments. 9,000 people live here. Basically advertises Austria's most modern plant, and then they're nevertheless repeatedly caused controversy. Okay. Suitability for living in high-rise buildings. Okay, so people yelling that you should only live in a single-family house. I think at the end of the day, anybody who tells you, oh, the solution is we need to spend more on cops is a fucking idiot. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap.